in a city where each dawn brought the promise of the same day as the last. Anthony lived his youth with a serene simplicity, anchored in the faith and routine of the community he knew so well. His life, intertwined with the teachings of the church and the company of longtime friends, unfolded smoothly, following a path that he believed he was predestined to follow. At 19, he carried with him an unshakable faith that was the compass of his existence, guiding him through the small joys and challenges of everyday life. Mia's arrival was like an unexpected breeze that stirs the waters of a tranquil lake. She was the embodiment of novelty in a world where everything seemed unchanging. A figure who brought with her the freshness of untold stories and dreams yet to be dreamt, with her smile that lit up any room, and a kindness that touched everyone's heart. Mia quickly became a cherished presence, not only in Anthony's life, but also within his family. It was impossible not to be captivated by her. Her aura of positivity and the way she made Anthony feel valued and special were rare qualities that made him think he had found someone who truly understood his essence. Anthony's home, always welcoming and full of laughter, became even more alive with Mia's presence. The conversations at the dinner table went on and on, full of shared plans and dreams, and the familiarity with which she treated each member of the family made it seem as if she had always been part of it. It was as if, suddenly, Anthony's life had taken on brighter colors, shades of happiness he had never imagined possible. Against this backdrop of contentment and new discoveries, Anthony saw his future unfold with a clarity he had never experienced before. Enchanted by the way Mia fitted perfectly into his life, he allowed himself to dream, building in his mind and heart the outline of a future where they would be the protagonists of their own love story, a plot he believed would be blessed and guided by the faith he cherished so much. When Mia came into his life, bringing with her a breath of newness and a glow that seemed to illuminate everything around him, Anthony felt as if he had found the missing piece in his personal puzzle. She was unlike anything he had ever known, with her infectious joy and a way of making him feel valued and unique. Mia's immediate acceptance of his family only reinforced the idea that everything was falling perfectly into place. However, the serenity of this new discovery was disrupted when faith, until then a secure foundation in Anthony's life, became a minefield. The invitation for Mia to attend a service at his church, a gesture that for Anthony symbolized the sharing of an essential aspect of his life, was met with a refusal that took him by surprise. Mia's justification for revealing her voodoo practice came as a shock to Anthony, not so much because of the difference in their beliefs, but because such a significant aspect of her life had remained hidden until then. This revelation not only shook the ground beneath Anthony's feet, but also cast a shadow of doubt over the relationship that until then had seemed perfect. The issue was not Mia's faith per se, but the sudden awareness that there were layers of her that he was completely unaware of. This silence, this involuntary omission, brought Anthony face to face with the complexity of human relationships, where intimate beliefs and values can both unite and divide. The dilemma that presented itself was not only about the love he felt for Mia, but also about how his religious convictions, so deep-rooted and guiding his life, could coexist with this new reality that challenged his most fundamental precepts. Rooted in his faith and wrapped up in the teachings that had been instilled in him since childhood, Anthony found himself at an emotional crossroads, where his heart and soul seemed to be pulling him in opposite directions. Mia, with her own light and the love that blossomed between them, had become an essential part of his life, a glimpse of happiness he had never imagined possible. However, the revelation of their divergent beliefs cast a shadow over the future Anthony dreamed of for them, a storm that threatened to drown the serenity he had found in their love. Looking for a beacon to guide him through this turbulence, Anthony turned to Daniel, his cell leader, a pillar of wisdom and guidance on his journey of faith. He hoped to find in Daniel an understanding ear and advice that would help him navigate the choppy waters of his dilemma. However, what unfolded was a chain of events that Anthony could never have foreseen. A chain reaction that turned his personal search for guidance into a matter of public scrutiny. The confidences made to Daniel did not remain between them. Instead, they spread quickly, like fire in dry straw, until they reached the ears of the pastor and other church leaders. What Anthony had hoped would be an intimate conversation and thoughtful advice turned into a spectacle a trial where his personal life was put on display for the whole community. A meeting was called, not just with Daniel, but with an extended circle of church authorities, transforming Anthony's internal conflict into a collective debate about doctrine and morality. In this meeting, which was more like a court than a support meeting, Anthony was subjected to a barrage of arguments, biblical quotations, and warnings about the spiritual consequences of his relationship with Mia. The words, although spoken under the guise of guidance and care, had the weight of judgments, pressing Anthony against the wall of his own convictions. The intervention, marked by fervent rhetoric and a zeal bordering on fanaticism, left little room for dialogue or understanding of the emotional complexity Anthony was facing. Under this overwhelming pressure, and in the absence of truly empathetic support, Anthony was forced to make the most painful decision of his life, to end his relationship with Mia. The choice, although made under the watchful eye and approval of his religious community, left a scar on his heart, a constant reminder of the price of his fidelity to his faith at the expense of his love. This act of renunciation not only closed the chapter on a promising relationship, but also marked Anthony out to his community, a stigma of his supposed devotion that accompanied him far beyond that moment of crisis. In the wake of the emotional storm that had been Mia's separation, Anthony tried to find some sense of normality in his life, anchoring himself in the routine and faith that had always guided him. However, the precarious balance he was trying to maintain was completely shattered by a twist that seemed ripped from the pages of a tragic story, an irony of fate that would test the limits of his understanding and forgiveness. Daniel, the cell leader in whom Anthony had placed his trust and sought guidance, became the protagonist of a scenario that Anthony could never have imagined. At first, Daniel's growing interest in Mia on social media seemed innocent, perhaps even coincidental, a like here, a comment there. However, what began as seemingly benign digital interactions quickly turned into something more, a closeness that hinted at intentions that Anthony didn't want to believe were possible. The news of Daniel and Mia's engagement, followed by the revelation that she was pregnant, struck Anthony like a thunderbolt. The shock of this discovery was a devastating blow, a betrayal that cut deeper than any words spoken at that intervention meeting. The irony of Daniel, who had been a driving force behind Anthony's decision to break up with Mia, now being in a relationship with her and expecting a child, was a perversion of everything Anthony believed to be right and moral. This whirlwind of events left Anthony struggling to understand how the convictions that had guided his actions could have been so easily discarded by someone he considered a mentor and a friend. The situation challenged not only his faith in people, but also in the structures and beliefs that formed the foundation of his life. He felt betrayed not only by Daniel, but also by a community that seemed to endorse this betrayal through its silence and acceptance. The pain of this betrayal was a heavy burden, a maze of anger, confusion, and hurt from which Anthony struggled to find a way out. The revelation of Daniel's actions and the church's subsequent support for his engagement to Mia were a mirror that reflected back to Anthony a distorted image of his own reality, forcing him to question the foundations of his faith, the relationships he valued, and the very essence of his identity. In this moment of desolation, Anthony was faced with the challenge of rebuilding his life from the rubble of his shattered beliefs, a process that would require a strength and resilience he didn't yet know he possessed. Armed with a volatile mixture of hurt and disbelief, Anthony made the decision to confront Daniel, driven by a burning need to seek justice, or at least some form of closure for the open wound in his heart. The tension-filled encounter was the antithesis of everything Anthony had known in his previous interactions with Daniel. Gone were the thoughtful conversations and wise counsel. Instead, there was just the cold confrontation of inconvenient truths and evasive justifications. Daniel's reaction to the confrontation was a mixture of defense and dogma, a wall erected not only to protect his own actions, but to keep intact the image of infallible leadership he projected. His response, "With God's plans no one argues," was a hard blow for Anthony, a phrase that, although clothed in an apparent submission to God's will, sounded more like a convenient excuse to justify his own questionable actions. For Anthony, these words were not only a deflection of the accusations directed at him, but a painful distortion of the principles he had learned to respect and follow. The result of this confrontation was more devastating than Anthony could have predicted. Instead of finding some sense of justice or understanding, he found himself once again in front of the church's disciplinary machine. This time punished not for an alleged transgression of doctrine, but for defying a leader's authority. The discipline imposed on Anthony, a repeat of the previous punishment but under even more bitter circumstances, was a testimony to the power and control that the church leadership maintained over its members, a power that could, with a few words, isolate and silence those who dared to question. This new chapter of discipline in Anthony's life not only brought the pain of punishment, but also the pain of isolation. He felt alienated within his own community, a community he once considered his spiritual family. The justification given by Daniel and the subsequent action of the church meant that the convictions Anthony had always held became a source of scorn. His fundamental beliefs were treated with a levity that left him questioning not only the intentions of those who led him, but also the very essence of the faith that had been the foundation of his life. Immersed in a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, Anthony found himself adrift in a sea of doubt and sorrow. The pain of betrayal and the weight of isolation forced him to confront a reality he had hitherto refused to fully acknowledge: the fragility and fallibility of the structures and people in whom he had placed his unshakable faith. The actions of Daniel, a leader who was supposed to embody the principles of integrity and spiritual guidance, revealed themselves as a glaring flaw in the tapestry of his religious community, a frayed thread that threatened to unravel the entire fabric of his beliefs. In this moment of isolation, forced to face the shadows of his own disillusionment, Anthony began to question not only the actions of those around him, but also the foundations of his own faith. The pain of betrayal became a catalyst for deep introspection, leading him to ponder the distinction between the essence of his spiritual beliefs and the human imperfections of those who professed to lead in the name of those same beliefs. Anthony's journey became a search for clarity in the midst of confusion, an effort to disentangle his genuine faith from the flaws and mistakes of those he had considered his guides. He began to recognize that true belief lay not in human failings, but in a deeper, more personal connection with the spiritual values that had always guided him. This realization was a ray of light in the darkness, a sign that although his trust in people might be shaken, his essential faith still offered a way forward. This period of solitary reflection became the fertile ground for Anthony's personal growth. Little by little, he began to find the strength to get up, not to return to the world he knew before, but to move towards a new horizon of understanding and acceptance. The rediscovery of himself and his faith was not a return to the starting point, but an evolution, a rebirth forged through the fire of adversity. Anthony realized that believing didn't mean following blindly, but rather walking with the light of his own conscience guiding his steps. He understood that true faith was a continuous dialogue between his beliefs and his experiences, a journey that was as much about questioning as it was about finding answers. In this process of reconstruction, Anthony began to chart a path that was uniquely his own, a path that honored his faith but also recognized the complexity of the world and the people around him. It was a path of healing, but also of hope, marking the beginning of a new phase in his life, where the lessons learned in adversity became the foundations for a wiser and more compassionate future.